Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim Daf Membet. This week's learning is sponsored by the Mandro family in memory of Irving Papi Maskov, Yechezkel ben Rachel and Abraham, a man who had complete faith in Hashem. He exemplified the quote, "Who is rich? One who is content with his lot. May his neshama have an aliyah." Today's daf is sponsored by David and Mitzi Geffen, loving memory of Mitzi's father, Jack Locke of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who passed away 2 years ago. He was so proud that all his four of his children made aliyah to Israel, and that his tribe grew during his lifetime to nearly 100 family members, spanning 3 generations, all in Israel. He was a generous and loving husband, father, grandfather, uncle, and brother who is sorely missed. Today's stuff is sponsored by Alex Lipton in honor of his father, Richie. Happy Hebrew birthday, wishing you a great year ahead. Okay, we're going to get started with our Mishna. There's a study guide for today, which will be helpful. I'm not going to share screen. It's not that necessary, but it will definitely be helpful in organizing the daf. We have a pretty easily organized structure. It's going to start with the Mishnah. Then we're going to have a machloket, or seemingly a machloket, a debate between Rabbi and Shmuel on one hand, Rabbi Yochanan, Reish, Lakish on another hand, which seems to be a halacha coming out of our Mishnah, debate about it. Then the Gemara is going to have one explanation of what the debate is. Then they're going to reject that. And they're going to have another explanation about what the debate is about. They're going to reject it. And then, I'm a little giving away the punchline, but they're going to say in the end that there's no machloket between them and they're each talking about different cases. So that's the majority of today's daf. Then we're going to go back to one line in the Mishnah, the last line, which wasn't really, or the second part of the Mishnah, which wasn't really so, actually not the last line, one of the middle lines, which wasn't so clear. The Gemara is going to ask, how could that be? Something doesn't make sense. And they're going to give 2 different explanations. And then we're going to learn the next Mishnah, and that's going to be the end of today's daf. We're going to kind of end up with the next Mishnah not making so much sense, and we're going to have to wait till tomorrow to understand it better. Okay, with that, let's get started. We're now talking about things related to the shmita year. So in the shmita year, the 7th year of the cycle, you cannot work the land. And what happens? Any fruits that grow, okay, I'm not going to get into all the details, it goes by when they bud, and then that's considered when they're shmita. Anyway, right now we're in the post-shmita year, but all the fruits on the trees, or the majority of them, are still from last year's fruits, and they're ownerless. Anyway, without getting into all those details, if you're mudar hana'am echavero, so you can't eat from mine, you're not allowed to benefit from me, let's say, lifnei shvi'it, and we took this vow, whether I said you can't benefit from me, right? Probably that's the case. It could be you said you won't benefit from me, either way. If it's before Shnat Shmita, okay, like year 5, 6, whatever it might be, so if we're in any year of the Shemitah cycle that's not the Shemitah year, you can't go into my field because that would be considered benefiting from me. We've already learned that Drisat Regel, just going into my property, is considered benefit. We called it Vitur, remember, or Yitur, which is something that even though it's not usually, I don't usually charge for someone to walk through my field, it's still considered that you're benefiting, and someone who's mudar hana'ah, who's not allowed to benefit based on a vow, is not allowed to do that. So you can't come into my field and you can't eat the fruits in my field because all of that is benefiting from me. That's pretty simple and obvious. But ubashvi'it, if you take that vow in the Shemitah year, you cannot come into my field. This is the sentence we're going to get to at the end of today's class. It really is more in the beginning of the Mishnah. But you can eat from the fruits that are hanging outside my property. We all know you could have a tree and the tree hangs out and the fruits are on the street. So if you can access the fruits from my tree from outside my property, then no problem. But you're not allowed to come into my property. You're going to have to figure out why, because theoretically, and this is something we actually made mention of a few pages ago, because we quoted a line from the Gemara at the end of today's daf, which maybe you'll remember when we get there, which is if my fruits are hefker, also my field is hefker. Hefker means ownerless. In the Shemitah year, anyone is allowed to come into my backyard and pick my fruits. Okay, so lots of people put up signs in Israel. This field, my fruits are hefker, come in. But theoretically, you don't even have to put a sign because it's automatically hefker. Okay, and you can come into my property, even though normally maybe you couldn't. Okay, but if you're mudar hana'ah, you can't come into my field. So we don't really know why yet. We'll get to that at the end. Now here the Mishnah is going to say, what if instead of being mudar hana'ah, I can't benefit? What if nadav hemenu ma'achal? What if I said I won't eat from you? Now eating will include fruits, but it won't include the field. So if I say, you can't eat from me, rather than you can't benefit from me, and that was the language of my vow, lifnei shvit, if it's before the shmita year, so you're allowed to come into my property as much as you want, because that's not called benefiting. But you can't, because it's not called benefiting from food. Remember, the whole idea here was food and not regular benefit. So since that's regular benefit, but not food, you can come into my field. But obviously, you can't eat my fruits. Right? Fruits, by the way, means produce, anything. But if it's on the shmita year, then you can come in and eat, because then there's no problem with you coming into my field, because that's all benefit. And we didn't say benefit, we said food. And you can eat because the food isn't mine. So now Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are going to come in with some sort of point relating to our Mishna. Something the Mishna didn't really explicitly say. Rav u'Shmuel da'amrei travayu. But the Mishna seemed to talk about, and again, it maybe is a difference in, maybe they're talking about trying to explain the Mishna. There's all different ways to understand them. The Mishna seemed to distinguish, again, there's two different ways to understand the Mishna, between making the vow on the shmita year or making the vow before the shmita year, right? It all depends on when you made the vow. What if you made the vow before the shmita year, in year 6, and then came in year 7, and you were still forbidden to benefit from me, but all of a sudden, the fruits that used to be mine are no longer mine. So what would happen then? And that's going to be the issue that Rabbi and Shmuel are going to debate with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, or at least seemingly debate. So Rabbi and Shmuel both said, Nichasim elu alecha. Now notice the Mishna just said mudar hana'ah, didn't say what the language of the neder was. So they said, if I said, my possessions will be forbidden to you, lifnei shvit, and I said it in year 6, okay, that's so far basic. That's no different than the Mishnah. You can't come into my field. You can't eat from any of my fruits that are hanging outside my property, because all my fruits are mine. And I said, these, right, this property, all of my possessions, that would include my field, that would include my fruits, everything. But here comes the addition. They say, Af al pi shehigia shvit. Even when I made it in year 6, in comes the shmita year. Now what happens? They're no longer my possessions. So are they forbidden to you? Come Rabbi and Shmuel and say, absolutely. I forbade them before. They continue to be forbidden, because I meant everything of mine, no matter what happens to it, even if it becomes ownerless. The only difference is that if I said it during the shmita year, then since I made my neder while my fruits were ownerless, it obviously didn't include them. I said these possessions, which means any possessions that are mine. The fruits are not mine, so I can't include fruits that aren't mine. When I forbid you, remember, we learned this already. I can only forbid you to my possessions or me to someone else's possessions, but I can't forbid you to someone else's possessions. So I can't take something that's not mine, in this case, it's ownerless, my fruits, and forbid them to you. So again, let's just review. Rav and Shmuel say, if it's during the shmita year I took my vow, it doesn't obviously include anything that's ownerless. If it's before the shmita year, it includes all of my possessions. Now, notice Rav and Shmuel use the words, if I said these possessions. The Gemara at the first stage is going to kind of ignore the language, okay? In the end, that's going to become the most important thing. But at this point, the Gemara doesn't think the language is important, so I'm going to kind of not treat it so importantly right now. But I basically forbid my possessions, or these possessions of mine. If it's before the shmita year, it's going to include those possessions even when they're no longer mine, like shmita comes in and they're ownerless. That's what Rav and Shmuel said. And specifically on that point, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are going to disagree. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they both said, Nichasai alecha. Now notice, again, I don't want you to notice this too much because right now the Gemara is not paying attention to this, but Nichasai alecha, if you say my property will be forbidden to you, okay, I say my possessions as opposed to these possessions, and we've already discussed that there's differences, whether I said these or mine, but let's hold off on that for right now. Lifnei shvi'it, if I said it before the shmita year, and obviously, again, you can't come into my field, right? We're in year 6. I said my possessions. Obviously, it includes my field. It includes my fruits. You can't go outside my field and pick fruits that are hanging out. Higia Shvi'it, here comes the big debate. When the Shemitah year arrives, right? We're now in the Shemitah year. Eino yored letoch sadehu. You still can't come into my field. Aval ochelho hu et hanotot. But you can now, even though I made the neder before the Shemitah year, it doesn't include items that leave my possession, okay, that leave my property, that are no longer mine. So they might be still in my property, but they're ownerless. So it doesn't include those. So now the Gemara says, and they obviously don't even relate to what if I said it in the Shemitah year, because that they obviously don't disagree with Rabbi and Shmuel. Everyone agrees if I made it in the Shemitah year, it obviously doesn't include my fruits. So the Gemara at first suggestion wants to say the following. The Rabbi Shmuel Savle, and I specifically, when I explained it, I kind of went along this line of thinking. Rav and Shmuel hold Adam oser davar shebereshuto afilu cheshiyetze mereshuto. If I forbid something now that's in my possession, it remains forbidden to you. Okay, I forbid you to, I make a neder, you can't use anything of mine. Even once it leaves my possession, it's still going to be forbidden to you. That's what Rav and Shmuel hold, because that's exactly this case. Once the Shemitah year comes, it doesn't make a difference that they're ownerless. You still can't use them. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish sabre ein adam oser davar shebereshuto lecheshiyetze mereshuto. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish say, no way, no how. I can only forbid things that are mine, so long as they're mine. Once they're no longer mine, they're no longer forbidden. It doesn't matter that they were mine at the time I took the vow. Once they leave my possession, they leave my possession. They're not mine. You can benefit from them. So now the Gemara is going to question this from two aspects, two issues here. The second one we're actually going to resolve, but the first one is going to remain a question. V'tizbara, do you really think that? And they're going to attack our understanding, the Gemara's understanding of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Do you really think this? Mi ika lamanda amal ein adam oser tavar shebereshuto lecheshiyetze mereshuto. Is there really someone who holds like what we think Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish hold, which is people can't forbid something that's in their possession now that's going to leave their possession? Okay, is that possible? If so, here comes the problem. In Ken, now all of a sudden, the Gemara is taking note that notice the language they used, okay? In Ken, if really that's the case, and they hold across the board, okay, meaning against Rabbi and Shmuel, they hold across the board that when I'm standing, not in the Shemitah year, and I say, all my possessions will be forbidden, that's going to include anything that grows even during the Shemitah year. And come Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and say, no way, no how. Shemitah year comes in, no, that it doesn't include. In any case, doesn't matter what language I use, because they're going against Rabbi and Shmuel who had a different language. Well then, im ken niflage b'nechasim elu, v'kosha ken b'nechasai. Let's think about the two languages. One is these possessions, and one is my possessions. Now, in which case are Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish going to be more obviously right, or will side toward them if I said my possessions? Because my possessions, when they're no longer mine, maybe they're no longer forbidden. Now, if this is the debate that they have with Rabbi Yochanan, with Rav and Shmuel, then the debate should have been in the case that's less obvious, that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are saying, even then we're going to say that they're not forbidden. What case is that? The case that Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel said, if I say these possessions, now these possessions I seem to be saying these possessions, and it seems to be even once they leave my property, according to Rav and Shmuel, right? Even once they're ownerless, because I said these and not mine. If I say mine, we've already learned this. We had all these sugyas, ki kari alecha, right? If I say mine and then it's no longer mine. But if I don't say mine, it's more likely that we would say that it doesn't make a difference, right? And that's what Rav and Shmuel said. So if Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish want to come and argue with this point and say, no matter what, once they become ownerless, I can't, right? I'm disagreeing with you, Rav and Shmuel. Then if they're disagreeing, they should have disagreed in the same case. And they should have said, even in the case where you say these possessions, still it's not going to be forbidden when they're no longer yours. Even though you made it general more and you didn't say it was so dependent on me. So if really Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish disagreed with Rav and Shmuel, and again, Rav and Shmuel said, it's mine. right? I'm sorry, Rav and Shmuel said it's these possessions. These possessions, it doesn't matter once they're no longer mine, it includes them. So Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish should argue in that case and say, no, forget about when you said nechasai. That for sure, my possessions, they're no longer my possessions. So of course they're not forbidden to you. But even in the case of nechasim elu, even Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan still think that it's not forbidden anymore. So they should have been arguing in that case. They shouldn't have talked about nechasai alecha, my possessions. They should have said these possessions. So the fact that they didn't say that seems to indicate that they don't necessarily think that way. And they're not necessarily disagreeing with Rabbi Yochanan, with Rabbi and Shmuel about that point. Vitu, and secondly, as I told you, this one we're going to actually reject. But Vitu, or answer this question. Hatnan de adam oser davar shebereshuto l'chashiyetze mereshuto. You wanted to say that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish think that you can't forbid something, right? You can forbid it only while it's in your property. Once it leaves your property, it's no longer part of that original vow. But there's a Mishna that says that you can. That even once it's no longer mine, I can still forbid it. How so? Well, Ditnan, it says in the Mishna, Ha'omer lebeno, konam sha'ata nehneli. Man says to his son, you're konam, right? You're forbidden to me. You will not benefit from me by vow. Okay? I'm vowing that will be forbidden to you like a konam, right? We've learned that it's a language of a neder, that you will not benefit from me. Mate, if he dies, Yirashena, the son anyway inherits. Why does the son inherit? So right now the Gemara understands the son inherits because Torah laws of inheritance. It becomes the son. It's no longer the father's, it becomes the son. So that's not included. However, in other words, in his original vow. However, if the man said, Ha'omer lebeno, I'm adding words, it doesn't say this, but it means, you say to your son, Konam shata neheneli, and then you say, right, your son is forbidden to benefit from you. B'chayav u'b'moto. You say, in my life and in my death. Okay, the way the Gemara is just saying is, if the father had said on my life, or on his life, or on his death, meaning, basically the father said, in my lifetime and in my death, my property will be forbidden to you. Then, turning now to Amabet, imate lo yirashena. If he dies, well, then you don't inherit. So now, what do you see here? The second part is what's important. Here you have a case where somebody forbade their own possessions, and they forbade them, right, for a time when they're no longer theirs. And once they're no longer theirs, it's still forbidden. So what do you see? You can forbid items. Okay, so we said, right, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish wanted to say, you can't forbid items now, they won't be yours later. Here you see you can do it. To which the Gemara says, that's not a question on Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, because since you specifically said, in our case, you didn't say, even when it's shmita, right? You just said, my fruits are forbidden, or my everything of mine is forbidden. And that didn't include once they're no longer yours. But if you specifically said words that would include it, then theoretically they'd be included. So that second question is not a question. However, mikomakom kasha, but we still have the first question again. The first question was, why did Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish use the language and change the language from Rabbi and Shmuel and say nechasai alecha, when the bigger, if they really want to say that you can't forbid things that now that'll no longer, right, you can forbid them now, but once they're no longer yours, they're not forbidden. It shouldn't make a difference, according to them, whether you say nechasai alecha or nechasim elu. And the bigger chidush, as we say, the more unique halacha would be to say, even if you just said these, which might apply across the board, even in the future, because you didn't depend it on your ownership, still, it's not going to be forbidden. So basically, we're stuck. Therefore, the Gemara rejects this understanding. And it suggests a second. And we're going to have three in the end, okay? And as I told you, the third is going to say they don't actually argue. They're talking about different situations. But right now, we think they're arguing still. Ella, so now they're going to modify it and say the following. B'nechasim elu. Now, why, starting with our question, why did Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish specifically use the language nechasai alecha, my possessions are forbidden to you? Because b'nechasim elu kulei amalu pligi. Because they don't really argue in the case of Rav and Shmuel we're talking about. Ki pligi b'nechasai. If you say these possessions, even Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish think, these possessions includes even when they're no longer yours. I said these possessions, I said it when it wasn't shmita, I included all my produce, even when it's shmita year, my produce becomes hefker, it's not permitted to you. It's still included in my original vow because I said these possessions, and that includes even when they become ownerless. But kipli given nechasai, the whole machloket, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish specifically said. If I say nechasai alecha, mine, then when they become ownerless, they're not mine anymore. So Rav and Shmuel savle, but Rav and Shmuel disagree. Lo shanu nechasim elu, lo shanu nechasai. Lo shna. Lo shna nechasim elu. It doesn't make a difference whether you say nechasim elu. Lo shna. It doesn't make a difference if you say nechasai. Adam osel. Rav and Shmuel hold it makes no difference what language you use. If I said these, I said mine. Either which way, I was standing at a time when they were mine. They're forbidden to you forever. Even the stuff that grows during the shmita year are not going to be permitted to you. And Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish savle nechasim elu. You're missing the word elu here, but nechasim elu adam osel. If you say these possessions, then it is going to include in the shmita year because I said these and I didn't depend it on my ownership. Nechasai, but if I say my possessions, ein adam osel, then I only meant as long as they're mine. When they're ownerless, not. So now the question is going to come. The first reading, the question was on Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish and why they use that language, right? It doesn't make sense according to what their theory is. Now we fixed that problem, but now we're going to have a problem on Rav and Shmuel. Is there really someone, and we already learned this, of course we distinguish between these languages. How could you say Rav and Shmuel don't distinguish between if I say my possessions or these possessions? Of course we distinguish. We're going to see it in an explicit Mishna. We're going to quote a Mishna on Daf Mem Vav, even though we saw this also with Kikari Alecha, and we had this already. Hatnan, it says in the Mishna, Haomer lechavero. So on Mem Vav, the following Mishna appears. Haomer lechavero. Konam litoch beitcha shani nechnas. Okay, so I say to you, Konam is to me your house that I will not come into. Sadcha shani lokech. Your field I will not purchase. Mate, if you were to die, or you sold it to someone else, mutal, it's permitted. Why? Because I said yours. When it's no longer yours, just like the shmita case, it's no longer yours because it's hefker, it's not going to be forbidden. But the Mishnah continues and says, if I said this house that I will not go into, I'm standing by your house and I say, this house I will not go into, or I'm standing next to your field and I say, this field I will not purchase. Well, then I didn't depend on your ownership, so it doesn't matter what happens to you and whether you don't own it anymore, whether you die or whether you sell it to someone else, it's still forbidden. So again, both times we questioned one group of Emoraim's answers based on Tanaitic statements. Okay, just to get at the methodology here. An Emora can't disagree with an explicit Mishnah unless, we've seen this many times, they do, where they explain some other way, where they say there's a machloket between Tanaim, but in these cases, it seems that this is agreed upon by everyone. So therefore, our understanding of Rabbi Shmuel here makes no sense, because to say that they don't distinguish whether you said nechasim elu or nechasai, my possessions, versus these possessions, can't possibly be true, because it's clear here that when we start at point A and they're forbidden and they're mine, and then we get to point B, they're no longer mine, everyone agrees that they're no longer mine anymore, and therefore they're no longer forbidden to you if I said my possessions. And that's different from if I said these possessions. So basically, to say that Rav and Shmuel don't distinguish, remember, Rav and Shmuel specifically used the language, these possessions. They didn't say my possessions. So to all of a sudden say that they must be saying my possessions, and that's where they disagree with Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, doesn't really make sense. To which the Gemara in the end says, Ela ki amre Rabbi Yochanan v'Reish Lakish b'nechasai, Rav Shmuel b'nechasim elu v'lo pligi. Now they give the obvious answer, which they should have said at the beginning. You have to remember also, Rav and Shmuel were in Babylonia, and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were in Israel. And it wasn't like they were having a face-to-face argument, and they said this, and they said that, and they seemed to be against each other. We have a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish said this, we have a tradition that Rav and Shmuel said this, And now they're saying, pay close attention to what they said. Why do you think that they argued? One was saying, the first group, Rabbi and Shmuel, were saying, Nechasim elu, which means these possessions. And because you said these possessions, if you said it when it wasn't the shmita year, and the produce was yours at the time, right? It doesn't matter, since you said the neder while they were yours, and you said these possessions, even when they're not yours, they were included because you didn't say specifically mine. You said these forever. Okay, now again, I might not be able to forbid things that aren't mine, but since they were mine at the time I forbade them, they continue to be forbidden to you. That's the key point here. Because we said before, I can't forbid something else to you when it's not mine, but it is mine now. And because it's mine now, I can actually forbid it to you forever. That's Rabbi and Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are talking about a different situation. They're talking about a situation when you said my property. When you said my property, what you meant was, as long as it's still mine. Once it's no longer mine, when the shmita year comes and it becomes hefker, ownerless, it's no longer mine, and therefore you're permitted. And actually, they all would agree with each other. It's just each one was discussing a different situation. So again, what we tried to do was, right, in the beginning, the Gemara seemed to ignore the language. Then they said, oh, no, can't be that explanation because you're not paying attention to the fact that they use different languages and, again, different wording. And again, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan should have used a different wording. Then we tried to say, oh, maybe you're right. Maybe that is, and they do debate one scenario and not the other scenario. And then we had an issue with Rav and Shmuel because the way we read Rav and Shmuel all of a sudden, right, that they agree about one case, but they disagree about the other. Well, then Rav and Shmuel didn't make sense based on a Mishna. So you can't say that it doesn't matter what language, which wording you use. So we rejected that. And in the end, just came to the conclusion, they're both talking about totally different situations and they actually would agree with each other. Okay, next section. Now we have to understand this line that we didn't understand in the Mishnah. Uba shvi'it en yored letoch sadehu. In the shmita year, you can't, if you vowed in the shmita year, you're allowed to eat their produce, but you can't actually go into their field to pick it. To which the Gemara says, Mishna de'ochel min anotot. Why are you allowed to eat the stuff that's hanging outside the field? To peri de hefkerei inun, because the payroad are hefker, right? The payroad are ownerless. The fruits, you can eat that. But aranami after, they want to understand why you're distinguishing between eating the produce and walking in the field. When you make, okay, my backyard right now is hefker because it's shmita, and again, it's not shmita now, but it's all the fruits that grew in the shmita, that budded in the shmita year. They're now fruits, right? And people can come take them. If they can come take my fruits, obviously they could come into my field because otherwise they have no way to get to my fruits. So that means that I make my field ownerless for people to come in and take my fruits. So therefore, if my field is ownerless, you should be able to come into my field. I'm going to have two explanations for this, two different ones, and there's a difference halacha between the two. Amar ula be'omdim ilanot ala gvuli. When the trees, if all my trees are on the border of my property and everyone can access them from outside my property, then, and now there's a big then, what it means exactly, but let's just start with one explanation. Then I don't need to make my field hefker because the only reason I'm making my field hefker, ownerless, is so that people can come and pick them. But if all my trees are on the border of my property and everyone can get to them any other way, then I actually didn't really make my field hefker. And then theoretically, now here's the debate among the commentaries. Some of the commentaries say, no one can actually come into my property because I haven't made my property ownerless. Some people say, no, it's only for the person who can't benefit from me. They can't come in because they have an alternative. Okay? There's a debate about whether it's actually forbidden to anyone to come in, or maybe it's only forbidden to those who have mudar hana'ah from me. But basically, Ula would say then that here's the big nafkamina between this, we haven't seen the second opinion, but he would say that if my trees were in the middle of my property, then yes, you'd be able to come into my field as well, even though you'd be forbidden to benefit from me because you have no other way to get to my fruits. And therefore I made it all hefker for you to come and you could actually come and take them. Rabbi Shimon ben Eliakim Amar, and this is the one we saw before. What's the reason? Actually, you really could come into my field. And my field really is hefker. as opposed to, let's say, Ula, who said theoretically it might not even be hefker in this case if they're on the border. Here, obviously, according to Rabbi Shimon, it doesn't matter where the fruit trees are. So that's not what he says. He says, theoretically, we're worried that if I come into your field to pick fruits, and this would just be for someone who's mudar hana'ah, then I might stay longer. Okay, it might be nice. I might use the shade of one of your trees because I'm hot. And then I'll be benefiting from your field. We saw this with now you might remember, we saw with the Bikur Cholim, with visiting the sick. That if you sit, you might end up staying longer and then benefiting, right? So there was that issue of, we're going to forbid one because maybe you'll come to do the other. So we're not going to let you into the field because maybe you'll end up standing there longer than just needed. Because really, if my backyard right now is hefker, so people can come and take fruit trees, but people can't go sit on chairs in my backyard and just kind of hang out there, right? I didn't make my field hefker ownerless so that you could sit and hang out there. No, I set it so that you could come and take my fruits. So therefore, here we're worried that if you stay longer, sit and relax and benefit from my property, well, then you'll be benefiting from my property in a way that I didn't allow you to, in a way that it's still mine, right? My field is not really ownerless. My field stays mine. The produce is ownerless because the produce is not going to change. It's always going to be a status of hefker. Next year, it won't be, but right now it is. But my field is my field, and that I didn't make 100% ownerless. And therefore, again, it's exera. Okay, so there'll be a difference between, let's say, the case, one of the nafkaminas, there's a bunch. One of them is, what if the trees were in the middle, right? If the trees were in the middle, Ula would say you can actually go in. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish would say, no way, no how. Okay. New Mishna. This Mishna, as I said, we're not going to fully understand. We can understand half of it, not the other half. If you can't benefit from me, lo yashilenu, I can't loan you anything. Okay, that makes sense because can't benefit. You can't benefit from me. That would be benefiting. V'lo yish'al mimenu, and I can't borrow from you. That's a little bit weird. Why can't I borrow from you? You're the one who's forbidden. I'm not forbidden. So we're going to have to understand when we get to the Gemara why this is. Lo yilavenu, I can't loan you money. Okay, that makes sense because you're benefiting from me. V'lo yilaveh mimenu, lo yilveh mimenu, I can't take a loan from you. Again, why is that? That's not you benefiting from me. That's me benefiting from you. This already we discussed. You can't buy or sell because there's benefit to both sides. And then the question, right, we already had, is it more or less, right? Maybe there's ways that it can be done, but without getting into all those details, but basically a sale in both directions, there's benefit, and therefore we can't buy or sell anything from each other. So tomorrow we'll see the Gemara that tries to explain why, that's why I said it's not exactly half, but it's, it's 1/3 of the Mishnah that we don't understand, which is why you can't loan them, right? Take a loan from them or borrow something from them if they're the ones who are forbidden to you. With that, we'll finish with today's daf. And again, we had, right, we have some time, I'll review the structure. We started with this Mishnah, then we got off on Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, who, by the way, there's a debate in the end whether they're explaining the Mishnah or they're really talking about something different that the Mishnah is not addressing at all. Okay, whether they're trying to explain the Mishnah or not really explain the Mishnah, and it just seems to be a little connected to our Mishnah. And then basically the Gemara went into 3 explanations of Rav and Shmuel. The first 2 they rejected. The second one they said in the end they don't actually really argue, Rav and Shmuel versus Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and they complete each other. Then we had 2 different explanations as to why in the shmita year, if you took the vow and the fruits are allowed, why can't you go into the field? And then we brought this next Mishnah, which, as we said, some of it makes sense and some of it is hard to understand. Get to that tomorrow. Wishing everyone a great day.